Temple's internet connection went down during my Kol Nidre sermon, and when I write a high holiday sermon, I write the words that I believe people need to hear in that moment, so I wanted to offer this recording of these words in their entirety, as well as a footnoted version so you can read more about the citations. Rabbi Jill Jacobs says that whenever she gets on an airplane, she avoids telling people what it is she does for a living, and I absolutely agree. Invariably, people have more baggage to unpack than you actually brought on vacation. Rabbi, my new acquaintance says, I'm so sorry that I haven't been to synagogue since my bar mitzvah. Or, I guess I probably shouldn't tell you that I had bacon for breakfast, right? This experience isn't limited to rabbis, and I suspect some of you have also chosen to obfuscate when stuck making polite conversation at 30,000 feet. Oh, you're a physical therapist? Ugh, my neck has been bothering me. You're even tangentially connected to investing? My uncle's an accountant. He says I shouldn't invest in meme stocks, but what do you think? Lori Gottlieb, a psychotherapist and author, shares the same experience. Telling somebody you're a psychotherapist often leads to a surprise pause, followed by awkward questions like, oh, a therapist? Should I tell you about my childhood? Or, can you help me with this problem with my mother-in-law? Or, are you going to psychoanalyze me? The answers, she writes, by the way, are, please don't, possibly, and would you be asking me the same question if I was a gynecologist? I understand where these responses are coming from, Gottlieb writes. It all boils down to fear. Fear of being exposed, of being found out. Will you see the human in my being, people worry. Will you see the human in my being? She's right. All too often, we do worry about how others will perceive us, and we act in ways that are designed to preclude others from seeing that we are, in fact, each of us, fallible human beings. When we're asked how we're doing on the road to recovery after surgery, even if that road is dauntingly long, we say, I'm good. How are you? I'm sorry I'm crying, we say, when sharing stories about our lost loved one, even as tears are rolling down our cheeks. I'm okay, we say, after each horrific thing, after each difficult thing, after each terrible thing thrown at us by the world in which we live. When we act in ways that prevent others from seeing the human in our beings, when we try to soldier on and are deceptive about our feelings, we're actually doing ourselves harm. Friends, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. When everything in this world feels abnormal, to have an abnormal emotional response is normal. And this world has been giving us plenty of abnormal. COVID and inflation-driven financial pressures, and COVID and our world is simultaneously burning and flooding with climate change, and COVID and a polarized, divisive political landscape, and COVID and renewed anti-Semitism from both ends of the political spectrum, and COVID and caring for elder adults in our lives, while also caring for adult children whose launches looked very different than we anticipated, and COVID. And when we avoid, suppress, and ignore our feelings of grief and loss and anger and hopelessness and loss of control, I'm good, we say. We don't actually make those feelings go away. We just let those feelings grow stronger, making us in turn feel overwhelmed and like we cannot cope. We hide the human in our beings to our own detriment. It's okay to not be okay. You're in really good company. Few seem to be okay right now. When you talk to school guidance counselors or youth workers and parents, it quickly becomes clear that the kids are not all right. When you talk to therapists and counselors about their sometimes year-long waiting lists, it becomes obvious that adults are not all right. As a people, as a nation, as a world, we're not okay. And we need to sit with that. We need to find ways to normalize that. And we need to talk about it rather than letting it fester and grow worse. Dr. Jamie Zuckerman says we don't get to pick the emotions that we want to have as human beings. It just doesn't work that way. Allowing yourself not to feel okay involves feeling all feelings and sitting with them until they pass. It is easier said than done for those of us who are well versed in putting on a good face, and I'd like to offer some of the collected wisdom of Jewish tradition to make accepting that you don't have to be okay just a little bit easier tonight. Have you ever thought about why our confessional prayers are offered in the plural? Hashem knew, but God knew, al chet shachatan knew? Many possibilities exist, of course. If you're old enough to remember reading a newspaper, you're old enough to remember scouring the headlines and hoping that a Jewish person isn't featured in them, realizing that the actions of one impact us all. When one sins, we're all treated as sinners. If you remember the biblical story of Cain and Abel, you know that the answer to, am I my brother's keeper in Jewish tradition, is a resounding, yes, as a matter of fact, you are. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bezeh, all of Israel is responsible for one another. And so your transgression is my transgression for helping to create the circumstances under which you transgressed. But my favorite explanation for why we confess in the plural comes from the writing of Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, who says, the purpose of public, communal, plural confession is to facilitate the process whereby the community as a whole stands together in common recognition that all people fail at times. Recognizing that fact, we may be quicker to forgive others. We stand together, owning our mistakes, because to err is human, and to forgive an act of the divine for which we pray. When we confess in the plural, we realize that we are all human. You, me, your mortal enemy, your best friend, all make mistakes, all transgress, all need to seek forgiveness. No one's perfect, even ourselves, or in this case, especially myself. And when we understand that, perhaps we can come closer to judging ourselves in the same manner we judge others, or by the same standard we ask God to judge us this day. When you see a dear friend or a loved one struggling, you don't berate them. You have compassion, grace, understanding, and forgiveness, right? We should only hold ourselves to the same standard. If it's okay for someone else not to be okay, it's okay for you too. Second, I want to remind you of a text that I frequently cite on Shabbat in preparation for our Misha Berach L'Cholim prayer. When we say aloud the names of those in need of healing, we do so not only to focus our prayers, but concert our attentions on their behalf. As the rabbis of the Talmud teach us, there is no fixed measure for the number of times that one should visit the ill. Anyone who visits an ill person takes from him 1/60th of his suffering. We can relieve suffering by making chicken soup, or picking up a prescription, or walking a friend's dog, tangible actions that need doing and allow us to feel helpful and accomplished. And we can relieve even more suffering when we lend a listening ear, are caring in our interactions, and don't allow our discomfort to make the situation worse. When someone is upset, or anxious, or scared, and expresses their emotion through tears, our first instinct is to make them stop crying. We feel uncomfortable because we feel helpless, and we try to make them stop. Here, have a Kleenex. It will all be okay. It could have been so much worse, we find ourselves saying, because we don't like when people are not okay. And it only makes things worse. Don't try to talk people out of their feelings. It's okay that they're experiencing pain. It's okay that for right now, at least, they're not okay. Sit with them. Say, I'm here because I care about you. Or literally say, it's okay to not be okay, if you have anything to say at all. We relieve others' suffering when we hold space for their hard emotions and when we don't try to shut them down. When we normalize that everyone has human in their being, it's okay to not be okay. And in recognizing this tremendous capacity we have to help others, we must also recognize their ability to help us. The Talmudic 1/60th of suffering isn't quite as much as the folk wisdom of a burden shared is a burden halved, but the sentiment is the same. Everything is easier when relying on supportive community, a partner or a loved one, a friend, a rabbi, someone who won't judge but will accompany, someone with whom we can expose the human in our beings. Eating, drinking, internalizing our feelings, I'm good, we say, when we really aren't, doesn't actually make us feel any better, but turning to others for help can. Finally, any student of Jewish history knows that it is all too easy to take a morose view. Known colloquially as the rationale for most Jewish holidays, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. We know there are lots of low points on the timeline of the Jewish experience. Expulsions, explosions, inquisitions, crusades, pogroms, most any day on the calendar can be used to commemorate a tragedy. The sages of our tradition recognize this peril and proposed Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, as a singular day. A chance to remember calamity lest we get stuck in a permanent down. We need to remember and never forget. But the valley of the shadow is open on both sides. We can move through it and out of it and not make of it our singular dwelling place. So too it should be with us. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not good to never be okay. Anger and sadness, just like happiness and joy, should come and go. When our emotions get stuck, when they don't change for more than a week, that's when it's time to seek help. Doctors, therapists, professionals can help us work through the experience of painful emotions that become stuck and that preclude us from having other feelings. Not so that we can only focus on the good in life or be grateful because it could be worse, but so that we can reclaim and reaffirm that the human in our beings is beautiful and real and universal. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down, and this is normal and natural and good. It's okay to not be okay, really. And if you're really not okay, if you're experiencing an urgent crisis, there are immediate resources you can turn to for help. The nationwide rollout of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is truly that, a lifesaver for people in times of need. Connecting you by phone or text to trained crisis intervention and mental health experts, more than 216,000 people called 988, and 39,900 people texted 988 in just the last month. It's okay to not be okay. And by recognizing, by sharing, by normalizing that understanding, we can save lives. We stand tonight at the culmination of the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe or the days of fear. But both are good translations. We recognize our many shortcomings. We feel vulnerable. We feel exposed. We feel found out. There is human inside our being, as Dr. Gottlieb writes, and it's okay for that human to be hurting in response to our failed efforts and the stresses imposed on us by the world in which we live. It's okay to not be okay. Be kind to yourself, only judging yourself as you would judge those you love. Share your feelings of not being okay with others who care, and accept their feelings of not being okay in return. Pay attention for times when you feel stuck or in crisis and you need more support. To pretend like everything is okay risks damage to ourselves beyond what will come when others realize that we, too, are human. There is human in our beings. We are human. You are human. It's okay to not be okay.